some folks swear that once you have one of these encounters, there's this hitchhiker effect, and now all of a sudden all sorts of weird things start happening to you and your family.
Is it possible to obtain the hitchhiker effect digitally if you were just reading about it or something to that nature?
Well, there's a lot of anecdotal emails and texts that we've got over, since the book was published, saying exactly that I was reading the book and suddenly there were sort of paranormal events that were happening around me in the next 24 hours. But there's a lot of anecdotal reports like that. But ultimately, this has to be studied in a completely rigorous, comprehensive way. And the data that OSAP gathered with all of the different individuals on the ranch and that some individuals off the ranch who are bringing stuff home with them, and then having all of these bizarre paranormal events erupting around them. You could talk about there's something, on somebody's shoulder that's manipulating their perception. You could also talk about the brain as a filtering device, which goes all the way back to William James over 100 years ago. So on Aldous Huxley and all of the more recent theories regarding how the brain and consciousness are linked. All of that stuff is right in the target of a very, very substantial research project if it ever gets off the ground.
Like what we think is a ghost or some kind of demonic gamesmanship, that people have in their house late at night, and objects are moving and they're hearing voices. And sometimes they get codes, and sometimes they're following down rabbit holes. Their whole life spins out of, they're chasing something, it's fucking with them. And like all of that ties in together as far as what's swimming around us in time, in different frequencies, but also in consciousness, in the sense of what we can pull from and manifest. And I think what we're going to figure out is that consciousness is kind of like the missing math that plugs into electricity and magnetism and gravity and all these things that we have these fundamental understandings of these big pieces of science, of the sciences, but none of them connect together totally perfectly. And I kind of feel like once metaphysics and physics come together, it's going to be like, oh shit, consciousness is like the missing piece.
Well, see, hitchhiker implies something has attached to you. But maybe a different way of talking about it is that you're now open to observing things that you couldn't see before, but that there's a dialectic, right? There's a discussion that you seeing leads to a feedback that it knows it's been seen, and so you see it more, right? I used a term, lighthouses in the dark, a long time ago in the book Phenomenon, that some people seem to be lighthouses in the dark, almost as if the ability to see is observable from elsewhere. And so it gets attracted to you. But once you've opened, you've lit the lighthouse. And so hitchhiker implies a negative kind of thing, something sitting on your shoulder, as opposed to you're open to seeing it. And so therefore it's willing, it wants to talk, so it hangs around.
There's a reason why the 6 observables is biological effects. Okay. That by definition is high strangeness. People after an encounter experiencing certain physiological and psychological things.
And I think a hitchhiker effect should probably be plural, not just a singular form of the term, because there are many effects. The Bass team first noticed it in correlation to things that happened to people who visited Skinwalker Ranch. In particular, there were at least 5, maybe 6 intelligence officials who, during the OSAP program, overseen and funded by the Defense Intelligence Agency, these intelligence officials visited Skinwalker Ranch, had an encounter with something unusual, and then took something home with them. We don't know exactly how it works. We don't know why it happens, but it's happened over and over again. It not only happened to those people during the OSAP bass period, but it happened to people who had visited the ranch during the NIDS era and even before that, where people would go to this property, encounter unusual phenomena, UFOs, whatever, and then they would go home and they were visited at their home by orbs, by craft, by crypto type beings. Poltergeist type activity broke out in their homes.
Can you explain is there the physics of the hitchhiker effect? I know people find that just too far out. You've experienced it yourself.
Yeah, and we are always nervous about talking about the hitchhiker effect because we might stimulate it. We don't know what causes it. But could there be a physics explanation? Well, if it's maybe functioning through quantum physics, there's a possibility of quantum entanglement that somehow whatever describes our consciousness, which is most likely a quantum phenomena, gets entangled with whatever the phenomena is. And so wherever you go, you're still connected to it. And that sounds hokey, but it's called the quantum measurement problem. A lot of scientists are studying it in great detail, and there's been some Nobel Prize nominations for the topic. And so I think that could be an explanation, or at least somewhere in the ballpark.
Everything you see is one band of frequencies. The highest frequency is light, unified mind. The lowest frequency would be blackness, absence of love, absence of whatever. And physical matter is somewhere right in the middle, right? So you have the ability to tune up higher or tune down lower, and behavior and all these things and time, and it all fucking comes together. But what it means also is that your brain is what's called a transducer. You're an antenna. So you create matter. And when you think something, it creates it. And you're not reactionary to your environment. You're actually proactive, and you just don't know it. So it really matters what you choose to see and feel, because that's literally what's being created for you. And people don't know this shit. So when you're like really into some crazy shit, the universe will start creating things, and we just think it's paranormal. Yeah. Like, for example, at UCLA, they were studying poltergeist events, and they found out that you can see a book move on the shelf and it scares you. But if you see a book move on the shelf and it scares the shit out of you, that book will then fly off the shelf and try and hit you. So the more scared you get, the more shit starts happening. And they didn't know why. Well, the reason is you're a transducer of your environment. You're an antenna plugging into all these frequencies. And once you go, oh, that book is moving, it'll move. So it's fucking crazy. It's like our universe, it's just not what we think it is. And the whole thing with UFOs is that they're fucking around with us because of that.
In one particular instance that we describe in the book, there were these very seasoned intelligence officials who, as part of the Bass OSAP program, went to the ranch to check it out for themselves. They're walking in the middle homestead at night. It's cold, and suddenly gets much colder. They hit a cold spot where the temperature drops dramatically in a matter of seconds, and they were sort of on high alert. In fact, these guys were on high alert the whole time they were on the ranch, because they'd read and heard about it. And they encountered some sort of an intelligence that had a sort of a menacing presence. It sort of froze them in their tracks. They backed off, and later when they went home, they had an eruption of paranormal activity in their homes. It is, and generally the way it works is it spreads to their family members. The family members, wives, children see these things ahead of time. The one character in our book, Axelrod, not his real name, we had to change that at the direction of the Pentagon when we submitted the manuscript. He had this explosion of activity in his home that was seen by his wife. She saw this standing on two legs, a wolf creature, a wolf standing in her yard, its paws crossed like this, leaning on a tree, staring back at her. A couple of days later, she didn't tell anybody about it. A couple of days later, her kids see it. They scream. This thing runs off down the street. They can see it's running on two legs. It's kicking up leaves. And they didn't know what the hell to think about it. But there were other things that happened in the home, beings, shadowy figures seen in the home, things moving around on their own. Their pet had been moved. They found their dog up on the roof one day, all kinds of trickster type activity. And then it spread from the kids to their friends in the neighborhood.
Well, the interesting thing about the hitchhiker effect is that it is very, very reproducible. George said that, back even in the 90s, the NIDS people were experiencing this effect. But in terms of reproducibility, um, we know that going into between the NIDS era, which ended really in 2003, and the BAS era, the OSAP era, which happened really beginning in 2008, 2009, multiple security officers were deployed on the Skinwalker Ranch property. A lot of those people, we've personally interviewed about a dozen of them, and a lot of those people have quote unquote, brought something home. Same kind of thing, poltergeist activity in the house. Sometimes they see orbs in the house. And then getting into the OSAP era where everything seemed to really escalate. And these 5 out of 5, 100% of the military intelligence people who were deployed at the request of the Defense Intelligence Agency onto Skinwalker Ranch did, as George said, bring something home with them. And even after Robert Bigelow sold Skinwalker Ranch, we have a new era of Brandon Fugel, the property developer from Utah, purchased the ranch. He installed a team on the property, and lo and behold, we have another set of instances of the hitchhiker effect. And remember, the people who went on Skinwalker Ranch in 2016 were very, very skeptical, and they were saying, this is all, this is not absolutely, this is all fantasy. And then stuff started erupting in their homes. They brought something home with them in multiple instances. So in terms of reproducibility, the hitchhiker effect has continuously affected people that we know of for about 25 years. It is not only Skinwalker Ranch. It is not sort of only happening on Skinwalker Ranch, but a lot of UFO activity does seem to give rise to the Skinwalker or the hitchhiker effect. For people who have never been on Skinwalker Ranch and just interact with the UFO phenomenon, they themselves, in some cases, I'm not saying in all cases, but in some cases, and mostly where we have the luxury of being able to study these people over many months or many years, a lot of these people, report elements of the hitchhiker effect.
I mean, a lot of people who've been at the ranch have taken things home, pretty frightening things that, and it lasts for a long time.
Yeah, I've talked with a lot of people who were there during the Bigelow era, and then people that have been out there now, and many people have strange things happen at home that can't be explained. They see things happen, things fail. They have actual things move in their house that they don't remember moving them, and so mine hasn't gotten that bad, but I do have weird, spooky things happen occasionally.
Has anyone ever seen what the Supreme Intelligence really looks like?
No one can look upon the Supreme Intelligence in its true form. You know that. Our subconscious chooses the way they appear to us, so it's sacred.